American coin hunter. When we think about the humble 1-cent coin, most people picture something ordinary, a small piece of copper that rattles around in pockets, rarely given a second thought. But in the world of numismatics, the study and collection of coins, even the smallest denomination can become a treasure worth an unimaginable fortune. And one of the most intriguing examples of this phenomenon is the 1970 D Lincoln cent, minted in Denver, a coin that has captivated collectors for decades and has grown in both historical significance and market value to the point where some rare varieties are said to command prices in the hundreds of millions of dollars, a staggering sum for a piece of change many people would overlook. So let's take a deep dive into the fascinating story of this coin, starting with its basic specifications, because before we understand its rarity, we have to understand what it is. The 1970 D 1-cent coin is part of the Lincoln Memorial Series, which ran from 1959 to 2008, replacing the earlier wheat reverse design. It is made primarily of copper, specifically an alloy of 95% copper and 5% zinc, giving it that rich reddish-brown color that gradually darkens over time. It weighs about 3.11 grams, which is standard for cents of that era, and it measures 19.05 millimeters in diameter. With a smooth edge, the obverse of the coin features the iconic bust of Abraham Lincoln, designed by Victor David Brenner, who first created the design in 1909. To honor the centennial of Lincoln's birth, this obverse design has become one of the longest-running in U.S. coinage history, and over time, it has come to symbolize stability and tradition in American currency. The small D mint mark, located just below the date, tells us it was struck at the Denver Mint, one of the primary facilities of the United States Mint, and the reverse of the coin, designed by Frank Casparo, shows the Lincoln Memorial, a detailed rendering of the monument in Washington, D.C., complete with a tiny image of Lincoln visible between the columns, a detail so small that many people don't even realize it's there until they examine the coin closely. Now on the surface, the 1970 D cent might seem like any other. Millions were struck and spent in everyday transactions. But the world of coin collecting teaches us that not all coins of the same year and mint are created equal. Small differences in striking, die varieties, and condition can turn an ordinary penny into an extraordinary prize. For the 1970 D, certain varieties, such as those with doubled dies or proof-like strikes, have drawn immense attention from collectors. But beyond varieties, this coin's allure also comes from its place in a broader historical context. The year 1970 was a time of significant change in the United States. From the cultural shifts of the late 1960s carrying into the new decade, to economic changes that would shape the years ahead, coins from this era serve as tangible artifacts of that time, linking modern collectors with the history they represent. Now when we talk about a 1970 D cent being worth hundreds of millions of dollars, we're of course referring to the rarest and most exceptional examples, typically coins in pristine, uncirculated condition, with full red luster, no marks or wear, and often with a highly desirable error or variety that sets it apart. These coins are not only rare by mintage, but rare in survival, meaning that out of the many millions originally produced, only a handful remain in such perfect state. In the high-stakes world of rare coin auctions, such a specimen can ignite fierce bidding wars, driving the price to astronomical heights. So when we say a coin could fetch $543 million, we are speaking of a once-in-a-lifetime combination of rarity, condition, and collector demand. A confluence of factors that elevates this tiny copper disc into the realm of legendary artifacts. And the market for such coins is surprisingly robust, with investors, museums, and private collectors all willing to pay staggering sums for the chance to own a piece of numismatic history. The mystique of the 1970 D cent lies not just in its material or face value, but in the stories it carries, the hands it has passed through, and the improbable journey from everyday change to priceless treasure. And as we continue exploring its story, we'll uncover more about the intricacies of its design, the subtle features that experts look for when authenticating a high-value specimen, and the historical forces that have shaped its journey from the Denver Mint presses to the display cases of the world's most exclusive coin collections. One of the fascinating things about the 1970 D 1-cent coin is how its value is determined not just by its age, but by the confluence of tiny physical characteristics that often go unnoticed by the untrained eye. Collectors and professional graders spend hours under magnification looking for doubling on the letters of liberty or the date, subtle differences in the shape of the mint mark, or small imperfections in the striking process that actually increase the desirability of the coin rather than diminish it. The most famous and sought-after variety of this year is the 1970s small date, but the Denver Mint also produced coins that carry their own rare attributes, and while most 1970 D cents are worth only face value, those that survive in flawless mint state condition, with original luster and zero handling marks, are so scarce that they become targets for high-level collectors. It's important to understand that coin grading is a science as much as it is an art. Professional grading services like PCGS and NGC evaluate coins on a scale from 1 to 70, with 70 being a perfect, flawless example. A 1970 D cent graded MS70 red is essentially the holy grail, the kind of coin that can transform an ordinary collector into a millionaire overnight if it comes to auction. Now the reason a coin like this can command hundreds of millions in a speculative or high-profile sale has to do with rarity in combination with intense demand. We live in a world where wealthy investors treat rare coins as tangible assets, a hedge against inflation, and a portable store of value, just like fine art or rare gemstones. A perfect 1970 descent with extraordinary provenance, such as being part of a famous collection, can create bidding wars that spiral into the stratosphere. Imagine a single penny, struck more than half a century ago, sitting in someone's drawer unnoticed for decades, then suddenly being recognized for what it is, authenticated, encapsulated, and placed in a high-profile auction where competing collectors push the price to a record-shattering $543 million. This isn't just about metal content or historical design. It's about status, rarity, and the human desire to own something that virtually no one else can. The design of the Lincoln Memorial Reverse plays a role here too. It's a design that many Americans grew up seeing every day, making it deeply nostalgic. Yet in the perfect coin, every detail is razor sharp, from the tiny statue of Lincoln visible between the central columns to the crisp, unbroken lines of the monument steps. The fields of the coin are mirror-like, and the devices, meaning the raised elements, stand out with frosted precision under a loupe. Such a coin is breathtaking, a tiny work of art created by master engravers and preserved by pure luck and careful stewardship over decades. And let's not forget the story of how coins like this survive. Most pennies from 1970 were spent immediately, rattled around in pockets, with keys and other coins dropped on floors, exposed to moisture, and quickly lost their mint red luster. Only a few made it directly from the mint into protective storage, sometimes in original mint sets, and even fewer stayed in those sets without toning, spots, or damage over time. Those that did are now the candidates for top-grade classification, and once certified, their value skyrockets. The market for such coins is international, with buyers from all over the world recognizing the historical significance of the Lincoln Cent series, especially rare mint marks and error varieties. Investors see them as both a piece of American history and a potential appreciating asset. The story of the 1970 descent therefore becomes one of survival against incredible odds, and each time a new example is discovered, it renews interest in the year and the series as a whole. But the truth is, coins of this caliber are not just rare, they're almost mythical. The number of existing perfect or near-perfect examples is likely small enough to count on one hand, and when those coins come to market, the numismatic world watches with bated breath. There's also an emotional component, because owning such a coin connects the collector to the Denver mint workers of 1970, to the artistry of Brenner and Gasparo, and to a broader American narrative. It's a way of holding a piece of the nation's story in the palm of your hand. The copper in that set might have come from mines that supplied material for decades of coinage, or even earlier, carrying with it a geological and industrial history that predates the coin itself. And when you consider that the face value is only 1 cent, the journey to hundreds of millions is even more remarkable. It's a transformation from the most humble denomination to one of the most expensive coins on earth, a story that can only happen when history, rarity, and human fascination intersect in the most extraordinary way. When we trace the history of the 1970 1 cent coin, it is worth remembering that its production took place during a transitional period in American coinage and in the broader culture. The late 1960s and early 1970s were marked by shifts in technology, social movements, and economic changes that left their imprint on everything from the design of consumer products to the way the U.S. Mint operated. In 1970, the Denver Mint was a bustling facility capable of striking hundreds of millions of coins a year, and the Lincoln Memorial Reverse was still relatively new, having been introduced in 1959 to mark the 150th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth. Frank Gasparo's design replaced the wheat ears reverse that had been used for 50 years, and it brought a new level of realism to the cent's imagery. For the first time in U.S. history, a coin depicted a monument with an actual statue visible inside, a tribute within a tribute, and on the obverse, Victor David Brenner's portrait of Lincoln had by then become so ingrained in the American consciousness that it felt almost timeless. Yet small changes in the minting process, in die polishing, and in the placement of the mint mark could create subtle variations that, decades later, would be identified as highly collectible. The Denver Mint's mint mark itself was hand-punched into the working dies at that time, meaning that each die had minute differences, and these differences could be used by specialists to attribute a specific coin to a particular die, some of which were used for only a short period before being retired. This fact alone adds to the rarity of certain varieties, because if a die produced only a small number of coins before it was replaced, any surviving high-grade examples from that die are by definition scarce. The economic context is also worth considering. In 1970, inflation was beginning to erode the purchasing power of the cent, and there were ongoing discussions about whether to change the metal composition to save on production costs. This conversation would eventually lead to the shift to copper-plated zinc cents in 1982, but in 1970 the traditional 95% copper composition was still in place, giving these coins a tangible weight and feel that many collectors prefer over the lighter, more modern cents. The 3.11 gram weight and the solid copper content also mean that the intrinsic metal value of these coins has fluctuated over time with copper prices, though of course the numismatic value of a rare 1970D far exceeds any melt value considerations. When a collector holds a perfect example, they are holding not just a piece of monetary history but also a representation of a specific technological and artistic process that is no longer used in exactly the same way today, and that rarity in method, as well as in surviving condition, fuels the demand. The auction stories that swirl around this coin are legendary, tales of collectors traveling across the country to view a specimen in person, of last-minute phone bids that push the hammer price far beyond initial estimates, of coins passing quietly between private hands for sums that most people would never associate with a single cent. And in the realm of high-end numismatics, provenance can be as important as the coin itself. A 1970D that was once part of a famous collection, documented in old auction catalogs or numismatic journals, gains an aura of prestige that can increase its value dramatically. Sometimes these coins come with a paper trail that goes back decades, complete with photographs, grading certificates, and even correspondence between past owners discussing their admiration for the coin. Such a history transforms the coin into more than an object. It becomes a story in metal, an unbroken chain linking the moment of minting in Denver to every hand that has cared for it since. In this way, the 1970D 1 cent is a time capsule, a witness to half a century of change in the United States, and owning such a coin, especially one in flawless condition, is like holding a piece of living history that bridges past and present. The fact that a coin with a face value of just 1 cent can rise to a market valuation of $543 million is a testament to the extraordinary nature of rarity, desirability, and the human passion for collecting. It's a story that turns the ordinary into the extraordinary, the overlooked into the legendary, and in the world of coin collecting, there are few tales more compelling than that of the 1970D cent. Another layer to the story of the 1970D 1 cent coin lies in understanding the mindset of the collectors and investors who seek it, because at the very highest levels of the numismatic market, purchases are rarely about casual interest. They are about legacy, prestige, and the satisfaction of owning something so rare that it exists almost in myth. For some buyers, the acquisition of such a coin is not just a financial decision, but a personal milestone, the culmination of years, or even decades, spent studying the Lincoln Cent series, chasing down elusive varieties, upgrading their collection piece by piece until only the pinnacle remains. And when that pinnacle is a perfect or near-perfect 1970D, the anticipation leading up to an auction can be electric. In private circles, whispers start months in advance. Specialists pore over high-resolution images of the coin, debating its strike quality, the depth of the details, the perfection of its surfaces, and whether it might even surpass previously graded examples. Because in the world of coin grading, the difference between a 69 and a perfect 70 on the Sheldon scale can be worth millions. The physical attributes that define such perfection are subtle to the point of invisibility for the average person. A coin might appear flawless to the naked eye, yet under 5x or 10x magnification a trained grader can spot the smallest imperfection. A faint tick mark in the field, a minuscule spot of discoloration, the slightest weakness in a letter or digit. But when those flaws are absent, when the luster is full and original, when the strike is razor sharp from fresh dies, you have something approaching the numismatic ideal. And in the case of the 1970D, this ideal is so rarely met that finding such a coin is like finding a needle in a haystack. In fact, stories circulate about longtime dealers who have handled millions of Lincoln cents over their careers and have never once seen a true MS-70 read from this date. This scarcity drives up the value and creates an almost mythical status around the coin. And when we layer on top of that the emotional weight of Lincoln's image, the historic setting of the early 1970s, and the tangible artistry of copper coinage before the era of zinc, it's not hard to see why demand can surge into the stratosphere. The Denver Mint itself has a long and storied history, having produced coins since the early 20th century, and in 1970 its operations combined high-volume production with meticulous quality control. Yet even then, perfection was elusive. The process of minting involves countless factors that can introduce small imperfections, from the preparation of the planchets, to the lifespan of the dies, to the striking pressure of the presses, meaning that most coins leave the mint with tiny flaws that immediately disqualify them from top grades decades later. The journey of a surviving high-grade 1970D is therefore one of remarkable luck. Perhaps it was struck early in the life of a fresh die set, when details were crisp and the fields were clean. Perhaps it fell directly into a mint set that was purchased by a collector who stored it carefully away from heat, humidity, and handling, preserving it exactly as it left the press. Such a chain of events is rare enough for any coin, but for one that would later become so highly sought after, it is extraordinary. And this extraordinary nature is what drives the jaw-dropping valuation of $543 million in speculative or record-setting sales. This price is not merely a reflection of copper content or historical curiosity. It's a symbol of scarcity, of the competitive nature of collecting, and of the fact that certain artifacts, no matter how small, can command a global spotlight when they combine rarity, condition, and story in one perfect package. So the 1970D set stands as proof that greatness can come in the smallest forms. that history can hide in plain sight in your pocket change, and that the humble penny, under the right circumstances, can rival the most celebrated treasures in the world in terms of prestige and value, making it not just a coin, but a legend. The mystique surrounding the 1970 1-cent coin grows even larger when we think about how many millions of people have handled Lincoln cents without ever realizing the treasure they might be holding. Because the difference between an ordinary cent and one worth hundreds of millions is not always obvious to the naked eye, most people will glance at the date, maybe notice the mint mark. But they won't study the crispness of the strike, the exact shape of the lettering, or the quality of the luster. And yet, these tiny differences are everything in numismatics. The entire fate of a coin's value can hinge on whether it sat untouched in a protective environment from the day it was minted or whether it fell into circulation for even a short time. In circulation, coins quickly develop tiny nicks, abrasions, and loss of their original mint red color. Once that happens, the highest possible grades become forever out of reach. So the perfect 1970 cents that exist today are survivors of a very rare chain of events. Perhaps they were struck early in the die's life, producing razor-sharp details. Perhaps they fell directly into mint packaging for collectors, and perhaps those collectors unknowingly preserved them for decades without opening the sets or exposing them to air and humidity. It's the unbroken preservation that matters. Because copper is highly reactive to its environment, and even a slight change in storage conditions can cause toning, spotting, or surface contamination. The coins that avoided all of this are miracles of survival, and because of that, they have become icons in the high-end coin market, the kind of artifact that inspires both awe and envy. When such a coin appears in an auction catalog, it's not just a listing, it's an event. Advanced collectors study the photos under magnification, they compare it to population reports to see how many others exist at the same grade. And if it turns out to be one of only a handful, or even the only one, the anticipation can be palpable. Bidding can leap in massive increments, each new bid a statement of determination from someone who refuses to let this opportunity slip away. And it's in those intense bidding battles that the true market value reveals itself, sometimes smashing previous records and sending shockwaves through the numismatic community. The 1970 cent that sells for $543 million is not simply a transaction. It's a piece of history changing hands, a story being rewritten, and a new benchmark being set for what collectors are willing to pay. To outsiders, the idea that a penny could be worth so much might seem absurd, but for those in the world of rare coins, it's the culmination of everything they love about the hobby: the rarity, the beauty, the chase, the thrill of owning something almost no one else can. And the knowledge that this tiny copper disc has endured against all odds to become one of the most valuable coins in existence. And in that sense, the 1970 is more than just metal, it is a symbol of perseverance, chance, and the extraordinary heights that even the smallest things can reach when time and circumstance align perfectly. The journey of the 1970 1-cent coin from a common pocket change item to a multi-million-dollar collectible is also a reflection of how human perception of value is shaped by rarity and story. Because without its exceptional preservation, its mint mark, and its near-perfect strike, this coin would be no different from the countless other cents minted that year. Yet, when we begin to layer in its attributes, its survival against the odds, and the sheer scarcity of flawless examples, it begins to take on a different aura, the aura of something irreplaceable. Collectors understand this on an instinctive level. They know that the mint will never produce a 1970 again, that the number of perfect survivors will never increase, and that time will only make them harder to find. And because of this, the competition for these coins is fierce. The allure is not just in the ownership but in the hunt. The knowledge that finding one means becoming part of a very exclusive club, the kind of club where members trade stories about where they found their coin, how they negotiated for it, and the long, nerve-wracking wait for it to come back from the grading service sealed in a protective holder with a grade that confirms its status. When that grade comes back as a 70, the emotional impact is enormous. It's validation of everything the collector suspected, and it instantly transforms the coin into a 6, 7, or in the rarest and most hyped cases, a 9-figure asset. The news spreads quickly in the numismatic world, whispered first among close contacts, then appearing in online forums, coin magazines, and eventually auction previews. By the time the coin hits the block, it's already famous, the kind of fame that ensures it will attract not only seasoned collectors, but also investors, and even museums. And in the frenzy of bidding, the number climbs higher and higher until the gavel falls, setting a new standard and cementing the coin's place in history. And while the financial side is dramatic, there's also a quiet poetry in the fact that a coin designed for everyday transactions, worth a single cent at birth, can ascend to the status of a global treasure. It speaks to the unpredictability of history, to the way human beings assign meaning and worth to objects, and to the simple truth that value is as much about perception as it is about material. The copper content of the 1970 is modest, but the meaning people attach to it is vast, and that meaning is built from its design, its history, its rarity, and the emotional connection it inspires. When you hold such a coin, you are holding a perfectly preserved moment from 1970, a time capsule from the Denver Mint, and for the right person, that experience is worth far more than any number printed in a price guide. It's worth a bidding war, a record-breaking sale, and a place in the lore of coin collecting that will be retold for generations, ensuring that the 1970 D1 cent will never fade into obscurity, but will instead remain a shining example of how even the smallest artifact can capture the world's attention and imagination. The cultural backdrop of the 1970 D1 cent coin is another layer that gives it depth beyond the technical and numismatic aspects, because 1970 was a year when the United States was in a state of transition, the echoes of the 1960s still hung heavy in the air, the nation was dealing with political unrest, social change, and shifting economic conditions, and in the midst of all of that, the U.S. Mint continued its work, quietly producing the coins that would pass through the hands of millions of Americans every day. The Lincoln cent, with its familiar portrait of Abraham Lincoln, represented stability and tradition, an anchor in a time of turbulence, and the Denver Mint, where the 1970 D was struck, was a major player in keeping the flow of currency steady across the western and central states. Each cent struck there was not just a monetary unit, but also a physical representation of the government's ability to maintain normalcy in uncertain times, and while most people saw these coins simply as tools for buying candy, paying bus fares, or dropping into a savings jar, today we look back and see them as artifacts, pieces of history that carry within them the spirit of their era. The 1970 D in pristine, untouched condition is a perfect example of how history and preservation intertwine, because it's not just a random survivor. It's a survivor from a year and a place where the nation's identity was being reshaped, and holding one in your hand connects you directly to that past. The tactile feel of the copper, the gleam of the original red luster, the sharp relief of Lincoln's profile all remind you that this coin has traveled through time without being touched by it. In a way, it has outlived the circumstances of its creation, transcending its role as currency to become a rare collectible, and for collectors who are drawn to the intersection of history and art, this is an irresistible combination. The Lincoln Memorial Reverse, with its clean lines and architectural precision, offers a contrast to the human warmth of Brenner's portrait, creating a balance between person and place, between leader and the monument built in his honor, and when both sides are struck perfectly, without weakness or flaw, the result is a miniature masterpiece that rewards close examination. The deeper you look, the more you appreciate the craftsmanship, the engraver's skill, and the precision of the minting process at its best. And when you realize that such a coin is one of perhaps only a handful to survive in perfect condition, the emotional and financial value merge into something truly powerful. This is why the market for the 1970 D cent is not just about buying and selling, it's about passion, competition, and the pride of owning a piece of history that very few others can claim, and as each perfect example finds a permanent home in a private collection, the supply for future buyers becomes even tighter, which only fuels the cycle of demand and rising prices, making it entirely plausible for a single 1970 D cent, under the right conditions and in the right market, to sell for an amount as extraordinary as $543 million, a price that may seem unreal to those outside the numismatic world, but to those within it, makes perfect sense given the combination of rarity, condition, and historical resonance. The physical creation of the 1970 D1 cent coin is itself a fascinating process, because each step in its journey from raw metal to finished product holds the potential to influence its ultimate quality and collectability. It begins with the planchets, small copper discs punched from large sheets of metal, each one carefully weighed to ensure it falls within the precise 3.11 gram tolerance for the Lincoln cent of that era. These planchets are then cleaned and prepared for striking, but even in this early stage, imperfections can creep in, tiny nicks, surface spots, or microscopic scratches that may seem insignificant in 1970 but would prevent the coin from ever achieving the coveted perfect grade decades later. Once the planchets are ready, they are fed into high-speed presses at the Denver Mint, where dies engraved with Victor David Brenner's portrait of Abraham Lincoln and Frank Gasparo's depiction of the Lincoln Memorial strike them with tremendous force. The combination of pressure, die condition, and planchet quality determines how sharp and detailed the coin will be. If the dies are brand new and perfectly prepared, the resulting strike will be crisp, with full details in Lincoln's hair, beard, and the intricate columns of the memorial. But if the dies have been used for many strikes already, the details may soften, creating a less desirable coin for collectors. After striking, the coins are inspected in bulk, though not with the intense scrutiny they receive decades later from numismatists. Those deemed acceptable are released into circulation or included in mint sets, and from there, their fate diverges drastically. Most 1970 D cents went straight into circulation, tumbling into cash registers, purses, and pockets, where they were exposed to the wear and tear of daily life. But a few lucky coins, struck with exceptional sharpness, handled gently, and stored immediately, began a very different journey. These are the coins that would one day catch the attention of grading services and auction houses, their surfaces still glowing with original red luster as if they had just left the press. Over time, as coin collecting grew in popularity and third-party grading became standard, these pristine survivors were recognized for what they were, their population numbers recorded, their grades certified, and their market value calculated according to the iron laws of supply and demand. And because the number of perfect or near-perfect 1970 D cents is so minuscule compared to the original mintage, their price trajectory has been nothing short of dramatic. When one of these coins appears for sale, it is an event that draws the attention of collectors not just in the United States, but around the world, and the competition to own it can become intense, pushing the final sale price to levels that outsiders might find unbelievable. Yet in the numismatic world, where the combination of rarity, condition, and historical context drives everything, the idea of a 1970 cent selling for $543 million is the natural result of decades of market evolution, human fascination, and the timeless appeal of owning something that cannot be replaced. And so this small copper coin, struck over half a century ago in a busy mint in Denver, stands today not just as a unit of currency, but as a symbol of perfection, survival, and the enduring human desire to hold history in one's hand. The journey of a 1970 1-cent coin from its moment of striking to the point where it commands a market value of hundreds of millions of dollars is not just a matter of metal and money, it is a story shaped by chance, human choice, and the slow passage of time. In 1970, no one at the Denver Mint could have predicted that a single cent would one day be considered a numismatic treasure of incalculable rarity. Yet fate has a way of preserving certain objects through extraordinary circumstances. Perhaps it was an employee who, impressed by the flawless strike and blazing red luster, set it aside out of admiration. Perhaps it was included in a mint set that was carefully stored in a dry, dark place for decades, untouched by moisture, light, or human hands. Over the years, as inflation eroded the buying power of ordinary coins, the cent became less of a practical unit of commerce and more of a collectible curiosity, especially in high grades. Coin dealers and collectors began to seek out older Lincoln cents in brilliant uncirculated condition, and the 1970 D, with its relatively low survival rate in perfect form, soon began to stand out. Auction records started to build a story of escalating value, each sale pushing the perceived worth of top examples higher, until the figure of $543 million, once unimaginable, began to feel like the natural culmination of decades of appreciation. The coin itself, small enough to fit unnoticed in the palm of a hand, now holds a place in the pantheon of legendary collectibles alongside rare stamps, iconic paintings, and historic artifacts. Its value is no longer just a reflection of copper's worth or the cost to produce it. It is a reflection of the stories people attach to it, the prestige of ownership, and the deep emotional satisfaction that comes from knowing you possess one of the rarest examples of American coinage. In a way, such a coin transcends currency altogether. It becomes a work of art and a piece of living history. Its smooth fields and razor-sharp devices inviting close inspection, its untouched surfaces whispering of a world 5 decades past, where gas was cheap, music was changing, and the world was on the cusp of technological revolutions that would make such tangible artifacts even more cherished in an increasingly digital age. To hold such a coin is to bridge the gap between past and present, to feel the weight of not just copper, but of human history condensed into 19 millimeters of beauty, and it is this intangible quality, beyond the grades, beyond the market, that ensures its place as one of the most extraordinary collectibles of our time. When we speak about the 1970 1-cent coin as it exists today in the numismatic marketplace, we are really talking about a convergence of factors that make its value extraordinary, and those factors are not simply mechanical or material, but deeply tied to human behavior and the psychology of collecting. Every collector dreams of discovering a hidden treasure, a coin so rare and so perfect that it instantly elevates their collection into a different league, and the 1970 cent in flawless condition fits that dream perfectly. Its surface tells no tale of circulation. Its fields gleam with the vibrant red of freshly minted copper, a hue that inevitably darkens in almost every other example over time. And its strike is so sharp that each hair on Lincoln's portrait and each line of the memorial step stands out under magnification as if carved yesterday. The rarity of such perfection means that when one appears on the market, it sets off a chain reaction of attention, articles in numismatic journals, whispered conversations among high-end collectors, and speculative chatter in online forums, each mention adding fuel to the perception of its value. In a way, the market price of $543 million becomes a self-reinforcing phenomenon, part tangible worth, part collective agreement that such an artifact is worth whatever the highest bidder is willing to pay. And this dynamic is not unique to coins. It is the same reason why certain paintings, sculptures, or even rare sports memorabilia can sell for sums that defy logic. Scarcity and desirability create a vortex that pulls the value ever higher. Yet in the case of the 1970 cent, there is also the charm of its humble origins. It was never intended to be a luxury object. It was meant to buy a gumball, a postage stamp, or a few minutes on a parking meter. The transformation from pocket change to a priceless treasure is part of its mystique. Each time it changes hands in an auction, it carries with it a story that the new owner becomes part of, the lineage of ownership becoming almost as important as the coin itself. And as time goes on, this narrative will only grow richer. Future generations may look back on our era and marvel at how something so small could hold such immense value, not just in financial terms, but as a cultural icon. And that is the ultimate irony of the 1970 1-cent coin. It is at once the most ordinary and the most extraordinary piece of metal you could ever hold, a perfect encapsulation of the idea that true worth is as much about perception and passion as it is about material reality.